In this lesson, we'll build out this landing page in Webflow using all the latest Webflow features. I'll leave a link to the Figma file in the description below if you'd like to follow along, as well as timestamps if you'd like to skip the style guide setup part. So let's get started. So let's set up our style guide. We'll open the variable panel in Webflow. These are all our reusable styles. I don't have a border width in this design, but I'll leave the variable in case I add one later. We do have a main grid gap, and if we check that out, our grid gap is 20 pixels. To convert pixels to rem, we do 20 divided by 16. That's 1.25 rem. So we can set that grid gap like so. Now, for our main max width, I usually take the width of the design, which is 1440, and divide that by 16. So that would be 90 rem, and we'll leave that there. For our left and right section padding, we have this set to 56 pixels, which if we do 56 divided by 16, that's 3.5 rem. And if we had other sizes, we could add them into this folder, like a small or large left and right section padding. For our top and bottom section padding, we have a small, main, and large, and the small version is equal to the left and right section padding. So those two match. And then the main version is 96 pixels. The large is 144. So let's go ahead and set that main to be 6 rem. We'll set the large to be 9 rem. And we'll set the smallest one. We could either set it to be 3.5 so it matches the left and right, or we could just link it to that left and right padding directly so that if we change this value, then the smallest top and bottom section padding will also update. And for our radiuses, we have a large, which is 8 pixels, and a small, which is 4 pixels. And we also have a round. So we can go ahead and set this to the 8 pixel, which is 0.5. This can be the small one, 0.25, that's 4 pixels. And the largest one is just round. And then this folder is for separating elements within a section. So like here, between these two elements, I have my space extra small variable. And I'm also using that space between these two elements right here. And then to separate this, I went with my space small. And to separate these elements, I went with space medium. So we can use these spaces and reuse it across sections to kind of space apart different elements in a consistent way. And those all match what we have right here. And then for our SVG stroke width, that's 1.5 pixels. And if we check that out on this guy, that matches what we have here. Now, for all our headings and body copy, we're using the General Sans family at a medium weight. The one exception is we'll set some words in our heading to use the Bosca family instead. To apply these, we'll head to our variable panel and scroll down to the font folder, which is right here. And we're going to set our primary family we're using throughout the site to be General Sans. I'm only going to use the medium weight with this, which is 500. And let's add another family in this folder, and we'll call this our secondary family. And we'll go ahead and set that to be the Bosca font. And we need to define the weight we're using, so let's apply size. We'll call this secondary regular, and we'll go ahead and set the weight here, link that to our font weight folder, and we'll choose the 400 weight. So if we ever want to change the family and weight we're using as our secondary, we can do it from one place. Now I'm going to go to the main text folder, which is our body copy, and we'll go ahead and set this to be the medium weight. And a quicker way to do this is just to use the down arrow key and hit enter, and it just applies the next one down. I'll do that across the text small and large as well. And then the only other thing I changed was the letter spacing. All the headings are using a -4% letter spacing instead. So to set that, we can just go ahead and rename this to 0.04 EM, and we'll adjust the value as well. And once we apply this, then all of our headings should be using that updated sort of tighter letter spacing like so. So let's set up our colors. We have this dark section background color. I'll copy that and add it into here. And we're also going to have a dark secondary, which is a lighter shade of that same dark color. And I'll just copy that from this card or the button, and we can add that into here. We're also going to have the main light color of our site, which is this light blue background color we're using throughout the site. I'll copy that hex code and add it in here. And then we're going to have a light secondary, which is used for like buttons and cards, anything that appears on top the light blue background. And this will just have a color of white. And then we have our brand color, which is this color right here. Sometimes we're going to have text on top of that brand background. And when we do that, we can use this variable here of brand text, so that if we switch out this brand in the future to be a different color, and now that color needs to have light text on top for accessibility, we can easily make that switch from one place instead of going back to every button, hover state, tag, and everywhere that used this combination. So we're saving it here. And we also have a brand secondary, which is this light green color I'm using only as a text color. It never appears as a background. So I'll go ahead and create the color here. I'll call this brand secondary, and I'll go ahead and add this in. And I'm not going to create a brand secondary text for the text color on top of this, since it's never used as a background. Now we also need to be able to switch our theme between light and dark. And since Webflow doesn't support native mode switching yet, we'll have to handle this on our end. So we're going to have our theme background color, our theme text color, and in this design, we even have a text secondary, which is this brand color inside light mode, and it switches to this color inside dark mode. And we're also going to have our card colors. So we could create these as their own elements, sort of a card folder. But in this case, because I might use it for other things too, I'll just call this color background secondary, and it can switch between light and dark mode. So we have our theme background text and border. Let's create another color for this, and we'll call this background secondary. And we'll need to define separately in an embed what this should look like in light and dark mode. And let's create another one for text secondary, which is that accent sort of brand color we're using. And we'll define the colors for this in light and dark. So let's set up our mode switching for our theme colors and our button colors. And what we'll do is open our custom code component. Inside that, we're going to open our color embed. And inside that embed, up at the top, we have our light mode colors. Our theme background can be swatch light, which is the light blue. Theme text can be swatch dark, which is the darkest green. And the border can just match that text color. Now we'll also have a theme background secondary that we're using for our cards, and that can be equal to light secondary, and that way it's white on top of our light blue background. And we'll also have a theme text secondary that we're using as an accent text color, and we'll set that to brand secondary, so it's the bright green inside of light mode. Now we have two button styles. We have a button primary and button secondary. And for our button primary, its background is actually dark secondary. So it's not the darkest color we have, but it's close to it. So we're going to set its background here to be dark secondary, and its border needs to match that background color. And its text color can just be light. And then whenever we go to hover this button, what we should notice is its background turns a bit darker. So it's the darkest color we have, and its text color stays the same. So on hover, background and border become dark, and text color is just light. Now for our secondary button, its background is actually going to be light secondary. So it's white on top of our light blue background, and its border should match that. So this will be light secondary, and its font color can just be dark. And then whenever we go to hover this button, if we check it out here, then it's going to have a dark secondary, and it's going to have light text. So if we come back to our code, let's switch the on hover background color to be dark secondary. And we want to go ahead and set the border to match that of dark secondary. And the text color, we just want that to be light, like so. And then we can define all this again, but for dark mode. So if we just come over here, switch the whole section over to dark, like so, we can define all this here. So inside our dark mode, we want our theme background to be dark, text to be light, and border to be light as well. And then we can copy this over. We want our theme background secondary to go ahead and be dark secondary in this case. And then we want our text secondary to be the brand color in this case. And inside of dark mode for our buttons, we want its background here to be light and text color to be dark. On hover, we want to switch it to brand with the brand text. So if we check this out, for our primary button inside dark mode, its background can be light, its border can be light, and its text color can be dark. And whenever we go to hover it, its background and border should change to brand, and its text color should change to brand text. And for this button here, it's going to be dark secondary for its background color with light text. And when we hover it, it should change to brand background and brand text as well. So if we check this out, our secondary button, its background can be dark secondary. Its text color, or actually its border color, should be dark secondary as well. Its text color can be light. And then when we hover, its background and border change to brand, and its text changes to brand text. So if we save all this and we scroll down to our color section, we should notice all this is looking good to go. This is our light mode hovers, and this is our dark mode. So let's build out our site. If we head to Webflow and go to our home page, we can delete the hero placeholder for now. And inside this page wrap, let's add a div and give it the class of nav wrap. Let's give it a position of absolute to the top of its parent and a high z-index so it's above everything else. Under settings, let's go ahead and set it to a tag of nav for SEO and screen readers. Inside that, let's drop a div, give it the class of nav_contain. We'll throw a container utility on top so it has our padding and max width. Let's go ahead and change this padding top to the smallest section vertical padding, and we'll do the same thing for padding bottom. Just change it to our small version so it matches the left and right padding. Now inside this, let's add a div and give it the class of nav layout. And inside that, let's add a link block and give it the class of nav logo wrap. Now in here, we're going to have an SVG. So if we just click on this SVG in Figma, we can copy as SVG here. And then under our Webflow apps here, we can add the SVG import app. And if we just search SVG import, we can click in this box and Command V to paste it in. Now I'm going to select the whole SVG and turn it into a component called logo so I can reuse it on multiple places throughout the site. And if we ever need to change this logo, we can update it from one place globally. Now on this logo wrap, the width on this is 128 pixels. So to set that, we can do 128 divided by 16 REM. Or if we're using the Lumos Chrome extension, we can do 128 space enter, and it'll convert it to rem for us. Inside the layout, let's also add a custom element, and we're going to set the tag on this to be button, and this will be for our hamburger. So we're going to give it a class of nav button wrap, and we'll give this a width and height. I believe the size on it is 56 pixels. So let's do 56 space enter, and we'll do the same thing for the height. And let's give it a background color to match our button's background color. So we'll say button background. I'll add a border width to this in case we ever want to use an outline button, and we'll do border width main. And we'll set the border color to be our button's border color. And let's set the text color to be our button text color. And then whenever we hover this nav button, we're going to switch its text to be button text hover. We're going to switch its background to be button background hover. Then we'll switch its border to be button border hover. And then now our hover is set up here. We can select this and add a border radius of round. And in here, we're going to have some lines. So I'll drop in a div. I'll give this the class of nav button line. And the width on these lines, it looks like is set to 26 pixels. So we can do 26 space enter. For the height, we're going to use our border width variable so it matches the borders throughout the site. And for the background color, we're going to head to custom and we'll apply current color so that it just inherits from the parent's font color. Then we can duplicate this so we have two of them, and we want to apply a display flex to this whole thing to center them. So we'll want this to be a vertical flex. On the x-axis, we'll align to center. On the y, we'll align to center. So we can do VCC, vertical center center, and that applies all those styles for us. And then I'll add a gap of extra small, so that just adds that in here, and we have our nav button. So let's also grab this whole layout and let's add a horizontal flex. On the x-axis, we're going to space them between, and on the y-axis, we'll align to center. So HBC, and then that just spaces them apart. And we want it to no wrap, so we can add no wrap, and we'll select a horizontal no wrap, like so. So now that we have that set, let's select the whole nav wrap, turn this into a component. We'll call this nav. And we can go ahead and link we'll create an attribute called data theme, set it to inherit by default, so it inherits its parent's theme, and link that to a component field called theme, so that between different pages, we can choose if we want the nav to be dark or light or inherit from parent. And on this whole sort of nav button, we want it to be the secondary style instead. So we can add a data button style, and we can set the style to secondary. So that way it just uses our secondary style for that. Let's set this to inherit from its parent's theme. And we can go ahead on the whole body, set a data theme of dark. So the whole page is dark. And then we'll bring this up above the custom code component. Let's add a grid guide component. So we have all our guides, and these guides just hide whenever we preview or publish our site. And inside the page main, let's drop a starter section component. I'll hit Command-Shift-A to unlink it. And let's change the tag to be header. And let's give this a class of hero. We could call it hero main or hero inner. In this case, we only have one hero throughout our site, so I'll call this just regular hero wrap. And then on the container, let's go ahead and add a hero contain class like so. So we'll say hero contain. And on top of that, let's add the container utility. So it has all those styles. And we'll give it a min height of 100 SVH, so it's filling the browser height. And inside of that, we can add in this SVG. So I'll just click on this SVG, right click, copy as SVG, and we'll open up SVG import. We can click in this box, Command V to paste, and let's give this a class of hero SVG. And we want this to have a background image. So inside the hero section, I'm going to drop in our global visual component, and it's just position absolute 100% within height of anything we added in. So I'll have it underneath the container, and we're going to choose just this placeholder hero image for now. And inside the hero contain, I'm going to drop in a div, and I'll just give this the class of hero top, and I'm going to give this a height of 0 pixels. It's just a spacer at the top of the hero container to space these two apart. So we're going to want to apply flexbox to the container, and this will be a vertical flex. We'll stretch it on the x-axis, and then we'll space them between on the y-axis. So we have that set here. Now we can adjust this padding like so, or we can use data attributes, which would create less code and allows us to link this to component fields if we need. So I can set small here, and it'll be our small section padding, matches the left and right. And then for the top, I'll go ahead and do large, so we have a little bit more space to separate from the nav. Now inside this hero contain, let's add a div and give it the class of hero layout, and I'll put it right in between these two. So it's right here in the center. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add a gap medium. And that way these two elements never touch. There's a little bit of gap between these on shorter screen heights. So on this whole layout, let's add a utility of uGrid custom. And it's just a 1-column grid by default, and it has our grid gap and everything's set there, good to go. And inside of here, we're going to add a column. So we'll add in a div, and we'll call this our hero. Let's call it column 1. And this first column needs to span 8 columns by default. So what we can do under our custom properties is add a custom property of grid column property. And let's set it to start on the first column and span over 8. So by doing that, it's converted the whole parent over to be an 8-column grid. Even though the parent is only set to 1 column, it has to be at least as many columns as its children. So this child is pushing the whole parent to be 8 columns. Now we're going to have a second column. We'll drop in a div, give this a class of hero column 2, and we'll apply that same sort of grid column property. And this one, we're going to want it to start on the 10th column right here, and we're going to want it to span over 3 columns like so. So now we have that column set. We have this one. Let's add an H1 inside this, and inside this column, let's add a collection list for now. Now to make this responsive, we'll keep this setting right here, and then on the next breakpoint down, we know this column is spanning 8. So let's take the second column and have it start on the first, so that now this whole grid is 8 columns, and this is spanning 3 of those 8. Let's make it span 4 of the 8, so it's a 50 split. It's right there in the half. And let's have it start on the 5th column, so we're pushing it over like so. And then on the last breakpoint down, we can have this start on the first column and span all 8 of the columns, and that way it just fills all of the space like so. So now that we have that set, let's set up this part of our sort of design here. So we'll select the collection. Under collections, we'll pull this from our projects collection. And for filters, we'll set it to only show the featured projects. And that way we only see one here. And we'll class this into our hero section. So this can be hero CMS wrap. I'll hit the down arrow key, right arrow key, hero CMS list. And then we can go ahead and say, we'll select the child, the item, and hero CMS item. And then for these, we're going to have this card, a link block inside of this. So I'm going to drop a link block in here, and I'll go ahead and give this a class of hero, and let's actually start a new component. We'll call this card wrap. And we're going to have this little text box inside with an arrow, and we're reusing that component down here. We're also reusing it down here. So it's a global component that can be used in multiple sections. So what we should do to do that is drop a div in here, and let's go ahead and give it the class of G for global, and we'll call this link title will be the name of the component, and we'll say global link title wrap. And inside that, we'll go ahead and drop a text block, and we'll give this one the class of global, we'll say link title text, and we're going to add a utility on top of text large so that it just has a larger font size, like so. And then inside of the title wrap, let's go ahead and drop a div and give this the class of global link title icon. And we want this to have a width and height of 1 rem. For now, I can search for icon slash to see all my reusable icons. I'll just add this regular icon inside for now. And I want these to stack side by side. So on the whole title wrap, let's add a horizontal flex, and on the Y, or on the X, we'll space them between. And on the Y, we're going to align them to the center, like so. And this is set to, let's go ahead and add that in between center. There we go. And this is going to be set to wrap by default. We want no wrap. So let's add this no wrap horizontal on top. That way it just doesn't wrap. And let's select this whole icon and set it to don't shrink or grow, like so. So we already have this one icon component in this, but this isn't quite the right icon we need. So what I'll do is go ahead and copy this one as an SVG, and let's go ahead and open up the SVG import app, and let's go ahead and drop this in. So we have this here. It's set to a border width right here of 1.5 pixels, but we want to be able to control this from variables across every icon of our site. So if we open up our variable panel and search SVG, we have our SVG stroke width variable here. We can click to copy it. And then if we head back to our path here, we can replace where it says 1.5 and just paste in our variable name. So that's completely linked to the variable. We'll grab the second path and do the same thing there as well. Now here, the path is going to look thicker when the icon's used at a larger size. It's just how SVGs work. But we want this 1.5 pixels to always match other 1.5 pixels we have on other things throughout our site. So we want to set the path stroke to not scale. That way it's true to size. And to do that, we can add an attribute of, we'll call this vector-effect. And we'll call the value will be non-scaling-stroke. And I like to apply this to all outlined SVGs, and that way the stroke width is just consistent. And I'll do the same thing on this other path as well. We'll do the vector-effect, and we'll add in the non-scaling stroke. And now we can convert this whole SVG into a component. I'm going to add it into my icons, and we'll call this one arrow out, since it's an arrow facing out. And now I can delete the other one. And when I search for icon, this is now going to be a part of our library. It's one of the icons we can use for global reuse. And then let's go ahead and turn this whole title wrap into a global component. So we'll create a new component here. We'll go ahead and call this global, and we'll call this link title and create. And let's link the text of this to a field on the component called text. That way we can change it out. And now we're free to reuse this component throughout different places of our site. And speaking of reusing, we also have this sort of image wrap here. And that's going to be something we reuse a lot because we have the border radius. It will need overflow hidden, position relative, and that'll be used across everywhere really we're using images throughout the site. So to make that more reusable, I'll use a global class as well, a utility as well as a custom class. So we'll drop in a div, and let's start with our component class. We'll give this a hero card image, and we're going to apply an aspect ratio to this. So our size on the image is 317 by 174, and we can apply a custom ratio, and we can do a width of 3.17 by 1.74, and that gives us the exact ratio from our design. Now we're going to want to add the overflow hidden position relative. So let's add in a div, and we'll make a global utility we can use. So I'll call this something like visual wrap. Utility for visual wrap. This will be position relative by default, so it can have absolute things inside. It'll be overflow hidden, and it'll have a border radius of our smallest radius size. And I can go ahead and delete that div. And now all I need to do is stack that utility of visual wrap on top of this, and it'll get all those styles, the overflow hidden, relative, and border radius. So inside that, we can have our global visual component, which is just an absolute visual of any sort we want. And we can go ahead and link that to the CMS image, and we can link the title on this component to the CMS title, like so. And we want to make sure this is, full width. Right now it's inline block, and we also want to make sure that there's some gap here. So the best way to do this is to use a utility. We'll use a vertical utility flex, and we'll align it on the X to be stretched, and on the Y we want to align, it can be top, bottom, it doesn't really matter there. So if we apply this utility, then it gets all the right styles there, and then we can come on and add our gap of maybe extra small, and we have all this set here, good to go. So speaking of reusable components here, we'll notice that we have this headline component with two buttons, and it could have sometimes maybe a subheading above it, but basically this component can be a reusable thing we have across multiple sections. So let's go ahead and set up this component. We'll add a div. We'll call this global header wrap. And inside of that, we'll add another div to hold our buttons. This can be global header button wrap. And inside of that, we can add our buttons. I'm going to use the with link version, so they're wrapped in link blocks. I'll duplicate it. For the second one, I'll set it to the secondary style like so. Then on the whole button wrap, we want to apply a flex box. So we're going to do a horizontal flex aligned to left and center like so. And then we want our gap on this to be extra small, so just space them apart. And then we also want to have a div to hold the subheading and header together. So we can just call this something like global header content. And we want this to, well, on the whole header wrap first, let's apply a vertical flex of left and center. So it just aligns it that way. And then let's add a gap of, we'll go with medium in this case, like so. So just space them apart. Inside this content, we'll add in our global eyebrow element. And then under that, we'll go ahead and add just a placeholder H1 for now. And we want to space these apart so we can add basically our vertical flex of left and center, like so. So it aligns like that. And we can go ahead and add maybe a gap of small. So that way these things are a little closer together, and this has a gap of medium. So now that we have that set, let's go ahead and style some things. If we open our eyebrow component, we have this marker, and in my design, I want it to be 12 pixels tall, 12 pixels high, and we're also going to give it a radius that makes it perfectly round. And for the color of it, we'll set the variable to be our theme text secondary. So it's just this bright color in dark mode, and then inside light mode, it will become the darker green. And we want to align this to center, so I can rename my flex combo here to just align to center on the Y, and that fixes that. So let's also grab our button components. The first component, it just holds the link block, and the second version is if we ever need to use this button without a link. And for that, inside there, we're going to go ahead and change the radius to be our smallest possible radius, and we'll go ahead and delete this icon wrapper like so, because we're not really using that on our site. And whenever we want to bold or italicize certain words within the heading, whenever we link that to a component field, we lose the ability to italicize individual words within this H1. So instead of using an H1, we can use a rich text instead to fix that. And what we can go ahead and do is style, well, first we'll give the whole rich text a class, and maybe I'll call this something like global header title. And so we can just say global header title like so. And then we can select the bolds, and we can style all bolds only when they're inside of this global header title. And we want to set their font weight to not actually be bold. So we'll apply under custom properties a font weight, and we want to set that to inherit from whatever the parent's font weight is. So if this bold is inside of a bolder H1, it will just inherit from that. And then for the italics, we can go ahead and style all italics only when nested inside this header title. And for the font stylings of those, we'll change the family here to our font folder, and we're going to use the secondary family. And then we just need to make sure we grab the right weight for that. So we're going to that font folder. We're looking for the secondary, and we called it regular was what we called it. So now we can update this from the variable panel if we want. But anytime we have italic text or bold text inside this rich, it'll just look the right way. And this works even if the class isn't applied to rich. So if I apply this class to my regular H1 element here, it's still going to style the bold and the italic words inside to have the right styles. And it looks like I did forget to, my color didn't quite apply. So let me just double check. Under variables, we want this to be text secondary, not regular text. There we go. And so now this regular H1 has the correct styles just based on bold or italic text inside of this class. But I'll go ahead and delete this because we are going to be using the regular rich text element, so we can link it to component fields. So I'll delete this H1 as well. And let's go ahead and delete everything in here except the H2 heading inside that rich. So that way we're going to default this component to use H2, and the client can change it between instances. So I'll go ahead and remove all of that and remove all of this. And let's just delete this stuff, and then we can link it all to component fields. So I'll delete that there. Cool. All right. So let's make this whole header wrap a component, and we'll just turn this into a component. We'll call this a global header. And we'll go ahead and link certain things to component fields, like we have this visibility on the eyebrow. So I want that to fall in a folder called eyebrow. So all the related things are grouped. So I'll say all eyebrow / eyebrow visibility and create. And then I'll create another one for eyebrow / eyebrow text and create that. And then for the heading, we can go ahead and link the whole rich text blocks to a component field. And I'll call this heading / heading text. So we can change that out. And for the button, we can go ahead and link the visibility first. That way it's at the top of its group. And we'll call this something like button 1 / button 1 visibility. And I can copy this. And we'll go ahead and link the text to button 1 text. And then the URL, we'll link that to button 1 URL. And then for this button 2, we want to do all the same stuff. So we can go ahead and say button 2 and button 2 visibility. And I'll just copy this to make it easy, create, and we'll link the text to button 2 text, and the URL to button 2 URL. So if we go ahead and create this, now we have this reusable component where between instances, we can hide and show individual buttons. We can change out the text. These folder names are grouping all the related stuff together. So on this one, I'm going to hide the eyebrow. I'll go ahead and set the heading here. So we can go ahead and open this heading, change its text, and we need to say helping authentic brands, and it's going to say create connections. And we want to select the word connections and just italicize it. And actually we want to select this whole thing and convert it to an H1 since it's at the top of the page. And so now we have the correct sort of styling and everything set there. And then for the button text, the title will just be our portfolio for this first button. And for the second one, it needs to say get in touch. And so that can just be set here. And if we want to set maybe a max width, which if we check out how this is looking on larger screen sizes right now, this isn't quite wrapping in the place we want. So I would just do that from a parent div. We could honestly set it on the whole column if we want it, but I'll just set a max width using rim just to get it to wrap in the right place that I want in this case. So if we just increase it a little bit, right there is a good spot. And then on the next breakpoint, that'll still look okay. And on this breakpoint, we might want to tighten up that max width a little bit since the font size changed a little, just to get it to wrap in the spot we want. So that's looking good there. And then on here, that's good to go. So that's all good. So that's our hero section, and we have that built out now. We can go ahead and build out this next section. So for our project section, let's drop in a section starter, unlink it, and we'll give it the class of projects wrap. And inside of that, we have the container. Let's go ahead and give that the class of projects contain, and we'll throw the container utility on top of that so it has all the correct styles. And inside of this, let's go ahead and drop a div and give it the class of projects layout. And I'm going to add a utility for our grid custom, so that way we can apply any column count we want to this. And I'll go ahead and set it to be a 4-column grid by default. And we can go ahead and drop in there a div, give it the class of projects header. And inside that, let's add our global header component. So we can go ahead and maybe hide this first button. And for this second button, we're going to change it to say view all. And for the title of this, it'll be portfolio spotlight. And then the heading is recent projects. So let's change the eyebrow like so. And let's change the heading text to be recent projects. And once we have that set, let's go ahead and add in our collection list. So inside the layout, we'll drop a collection list. We'll pull it from the projects collection, and we'll go ahead and filter this to not include the featured one that was in the hero. And let's go ahead and set this to be our projects CMS wrap. Inside, we'll have a projects CMS list, and in that, a projects CMS item. Now we want this wrap to span 3 of our 4-column grid. So under custom properties, we can add a grid column property, set it to start on the auto column and span over 3, like so. Now we want this CMS list to be a 3-column grid, and I can actually reuse the responsiveness of that on this 3-column grid here because I don't want it to shift to be a 2 and 1 underneath, but I want them all to shift to be a single column grid on the lower breakpoint. So it goes from 3 to a 1-column grid. So we can make a reusable utility for that, and we already have our grid custom utility, and I can just go ahead and duplicate that and create a grid, and I'll just call this column 3, and that way I can set up my own responsiveness for any 3-column layout throughout my site. So I'm going to make it be a 3-column grid here on desktop, and it can stay 3 columns on tablet, and then on the next breakpoint, I'll go ahead and switch it to be a single column grid. And once I have that utility set up, I can reuse it throughout my whole site. So delete that div here. And on this collection list, let's add the utility for grid column 3. And that way it has the gap, it has everything set up for us, and the responsiveness is just automatically handled for us. I also realized that this is actually wrapping here, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and edit this eyebrow component, and let's go ahead and add a no wrap utility on top, like so. So now that we have that set, let's go ahead and handle the responsiveness for this main grid here. So on lower breakpoints, what we can do is convert this grid to be a single column grid instead of 4-column grid on tablet. And because this collection wrapper is spanning 3 columns, it's forcing the parent grid to be 3 columns. So we'll change the collection wrapper to span 1, and now it's just a single column grid on this whole parent. Now this gap here is the default grid gap, that vertical gap, but I can go ahead and adjust this, just unlink it and set our row gap to be the space, and we'll go with large here. So the space between this heading and button is medium, And if we put a vertical space of large, then when things stack, this space will be larger than this medium space here. So it spaces the elements apart nicely. Now, once we have that set, we're going to want a reusable card inside of this collection item. I like to usually just make anything inside the item be a component. That way, when this is used on multiple pages, it's easier to update things globally. So we have a link block in here, and I'm going to call this projects card wrap. And we can give this a width of 100%. And we're going to want to give it the utility of our visual wrap. So that way it has position relative, overflow hidden, border radius, and everything built in. And then inside that, we'll add our global visual element so that it's the absolute image inside of that. And then inside this card wrap, we'll drop a div, and we can call this projects card inner. We'll give it a position relative so it sits on top of the absolute background image. And this, we want to give it an aspect ratio. So it has a width of 317 by 421. So we can just give this a custom ratio of 3.17 by a height of 4.21. And if the text is ever taller, this will still grow in height. So this isn't forcing a fixed height on it. It's just setting the ideal ratio for our card. And we also want to give it some padding, which it looks like is 20 pixels on all sides. So I can do 20 space, and then I can do Shift Enter to apply across all sides. And we want to add our global sort of link title in here. So the text with the icon, and that's good to go. And we want to align this to the bottom. Actually, before we do that, let's add our gradient in here. So under backgrounds, let's just add this gradient, and it can go from black. And let's, we don't need to link this to a variable. This will be black at like a 70% opacity. This will be black at a 0 opacity. And we'll basically make this start somewhere around the halfway point down the card. And we'll bring this up so it covers more of the bottom for the title. And then we just want to align the title to the bottom. So we can use a vertical flex. We can stretch it, and then we can align to bottom. And so if we apply that, now this is anchored down. So let's create this whole link as a component, and we'll just call this projects card. And we want to select the image, link that to a component field. So we have our image here, and let's link the text of this to a component field called text. And now on the whole component, we can link this to a collection field for our CMS image and our CMS title. So all that's good. And then we just want to make sure that each image is varying heights, each card. So if we select our collection here, we could style all maybe even items, and that would mean it would only style this middle card since it's the only even item in the list. And we can just push it down using rim and with margin. So that is kind of like that. And then we can also go ahead and style maybe the last item in the list and just push that down with margin like so. So it kind of looks like that. And we can keep that here, but on the next breakpoint, when everything stacks, we want to zero out this margin. So for the last item, we'll zero out the top margin. And then we want to say for the even items, zero out the top margin on this breakpoint so that everything just looks good again. And that's really all we need for this layout. So from there, we can create our split column view. So to create the next section, let's drop a starter section component and let's unlink it. And let's give it the class of split wrap. And inside of that, we have the container. Let's give that a class of split contain. And let's give it a utility of container on top. And inside of that, let's drop a div and let's give this the class of split layout. And let's add a uGrid custom on this so that it's just a one column grid and it has our gap and everything set there. And inside of that, let's add a div, give it the class of split column 1. We want this to span 5 of the columns, so we'll add a grid column property, set it to start on the auto column and span over 5. And we'll drop our second column in here and give this a split column 2. And we'll give this the same grid column property. And we want it to start on the 7th column and span over 6. So that is starting right here, spans all 6. And then inside here, we'll drop in our global sort of header so that it has all the content we need for it. And in this side, we're going to drop a div, give it the class of split visual. We want this to have the aspect ratio. So we have 723 and 580. So we can come to a custom ratio and do 7.23 and 5.8. And that'll set the ratio we need there. And we want this to have the overflow hidden and the border radius. So we'll add our U visual wrap on top. So it has all that styles there. And let's go ahead and add our global visual component inside. So it has the image, it's absolute. And on this base class, let's give it a min width of 50 viewport width. So it's filling all the way to the edge. Even on larger screen sizes, it's going completely to the edge like so. Now that we have that set, we want to go ahead and wrap this in a div. And let's just give this the class of split content. And let's go ahead and give it a height of 100%. So it's filling all that available space. And let's give it a vertical flex to the left and to the center. So it just aligns that content to the center like so. And that should be good to go. Now, if we had a lot more text in here, like let me just add maybe a bunch of paragraphs, we want to make sure that our text is always basically that our image is always as tall as the text. So to do that, we can give the base class a split visual a height of 100%. And that way, if the text is really tall, it'll just fill all that space. And let's go ahead and give it a width of 100% as well. So there we go. And then if there's less text, it'll just fill the aspect ratio like so. So that's how we can cover that. And when this wraps under here, we want to make sure that our row gap is the space large. So that way there's more space between these buttons than there is between the image. And then we can just go ahead and set this to wrap. So on the next breakpoint down, we can set this here. We know we want it to start on the first available column, and then we'll have it span 5 since this column is spanning 5. That way it just matches and they're both full width, and we have our large gap there, and everything is just fully responsive from that point on down. So then we can just turn this whole section into a component. We'll go ahead and create the component here, and I'll start with section slash so that I can search for section and see all the reusable sections throughout my site. And this can be a content section, so I'll put it in a content folder, and we can call this our to column or something like that, so we know what this module is for. And I'm going to grab the whole section and I'll link its theme. And I like to put this in a folder called section styles so that all the related section styles are grouped together. And I'll call this theme. And we can grab the container and we can link that to component fields as well. And we'll call this something like section styles padding top. And let's link the value of the second attribute to section styles padding bottom. And we can set that there. So now we should be able to adjust all that from the component. Let's grab the eyebrow text and let's link that to a field. And we'll just call this eyebrow / eyebrow text. And let's do link up the heading like so. And we'll just call this something like heading. And this will be heading text. And then we'll link the button 1 visibility. And this can just be button 1 / button 1 visibility. And let's go ahead and set the text to be button 1 / button 1 text. And we'd want to link the URL, button 1 / button 1 URL. And let's do the same for button 2 while we're at it. So we'll just say button 2 and we'll say button 2 visibility. Let me just copy this and we'll do the same for text. And we'll say button 2 text. And let's link the URL, button 2 URL. So once we have all of this set, we should be good to have a reusable component. Let's link this visual as well. And we can say visual folder, and we'll call this image file. We could link the video URL to this too if we wanted to. And now this component is completely reusable. So let's go ahead and copy this eyebrow text, and that can go right here. And let's go ahead and copy this heading text, and let's open this up here. And we'll just go ahead and paste this in. We want strategies to be the bolded word, and we want to add, right here, cut through the noise, and we want to italicize this, and we want to hide the button 1 in this instance, and we'll set the button 2 to say our story, like so, and we'll set the visual, the image, to be this image here. So then we can duplicate the whole component, and on this component, we'll go ahead and set the theme to be light, so it's a light theme like so. We'll go ahead and bring button 1 back into it, and we'll go ahead and change out a different image for this. And let's go ahead and set the text here we can copy for our subhead. And we'll just plug that in right here to subhead, eyebrow. And for the heading, we want impactful to be the bold word. So we can just go ahead and paste this in. Impactful, creative team, and impactful will be bold. And we'll go ahead and italicize creative team, like so. So we have that set there. And then our button text can just be view openings and about the team. So I'll plug that in here, view openings, and then this one can say about the team. And what we can do is set this, since it'll be following a dark section after it, we can set the padding bottom to be large in this case, just to give it a little bit more space. And this one, since it's leading up to a light section, I'll set the padding bottom to be large as well, just to give that more space. And we really don't need any top padding on this instance because it's already following a darker section. So those can be brought together. Let me set the padding top on this one to be large. And that way, every time it's following like a section break, we'll do large on top. We can do medium in here and then large to separate these two. And now let's just build out this blog section. So let's drop in our starter section component. We'll pull it up above the previous one, and let's go ahead and set the theme on this to light and the padding top to large. And then on this next section, we'll set padding top to none. And let's go ahead and detach this instance and give it a class of blog wrap. And on this container inside, let's give this a class of blog contain. And let's add the container utility on top, so that's all good. And inside that, let's drop a div, give it the class of blog layout. And we want to drop our global header component in that. And one thing I forgot to do was set this whole button wrap to have a visibility on the component. So we can just call this buttons, and we can say buttons visibility. And that way, if we want to hide both buttons, we can do it from here, and the gap between them will remove. And we can do the same thing by hiding the eyebrow and opening up the heading text. Let's go ahead and call this insights from our blog, and we'll select this and italicize like so. And so now that we have that set, let's drop a collection list, and let's pull this from the blog collection. Let's give it a class, and we're going to give this a class of blog CMS wrap, and the child will have blog CMS list. And then under that, blog CMS item. And on the CMS list, we can just add the utility of grid column 3 that we created earlier, and that'll be fully responsive. And for the gap between these two, what we want to do is add a vertical flex, and we're going to align them to stretch and then align to the top. And then we can go ahead and add maybe a gap of medium between them to just space them apart like so. And on this blog list, we're going to add a card inside that. So this can be a link block. We want to make this a component. This can just be called blog card wrap. It can have 100% width and 100% height in case cards next to it have more content. They'll all be as tall as each other. And we want to give them a background color of our theme background secondary. So it's the card color, and a border radius of our main border radius. We'll go ahead and add 2 rem padding on all sides. And in that, I'm going to add a text block, and I want to make a tag element. And I already have in Lumos a global sort of tag wrap, so I can just add that in and use that here. But for the color of it, we want to set its background to be brand. And we can reference this directly from the swatch folder since we're not changing it inside light and dark mode. It'll just always be brand. And then for the font color of it, we want to set this to be brand text, and that'll be the tag. And I'll call this something like branding. And inside that, we can just drop a text block, and I can call this something like blog card title, and I can give it a utility of h4. and so that it just has the larger font size. We'll wrap these together in a div. That way we can space them apart. We'll call this something like blog card header, and we'll put the title and the tag inside that. We can go ahead and select this, and let's add a vertical flex to the left and to the top. And let's go ahead and add a gap, and we'll use gap, maybe gap small in this case, so they're spaced apart a little. And then inside the link block, let's add our global sort of link title element here. I'll set this to be just kind of a date placeholder for now. And on the whole card, let's set a vertical left and top, and let's add a gap, and let's go medium so that it's a little bit more spaced out than this piece itself. And on the whole link, we actually want to, instead of top, we should go with between. And that way it just spaces them between for taller cards. Between, like so. And it says it can't find the class, so let's just remove that, and then we can add it back in, and it'll let us get around that. So there we go, between, and that's set. And then this is just fully responsive, so we can select the whole link block and create a component. I'll call this blog card. And then we can start linking things to component fields, like this can be the tag. This here can be the heading, and the next thing can be the date, which is this one here, and we can set that like so to be date. And we can set the whole link and link that to a field called link, so it can take us to that collection page. And one thing I forgot to do is set a gap inside this, so I can just go ahead and add a gap of extra small. And so that can be set there, just space them apart. And now on this whole blog card, we can link the tag to be the category, the heading can be the name, the date can be the published date, and we can configure that to use the format we're looking for, something more condensed, like I guess this is fine. And we can link this to go to the blog collection page. So for our footer, we can close this page main. We're going to add it inside the page wrap. We'll start with our starter section, and let's go ahead and set this to always be dark regardless of the page color. Padding top and bottom can be small, and let's go ahead and unlink this like so. And once we have that set, let's set it to a tag of footer. And let's give this a class of footer wrap, and let's grab the container, give that a class of footer contain, and let's add the container utility on top. And let's give this a min height of 100 SVH, so it's filling the screen height. And let's drop a div inside, give this a class of footer top, give it a height of 0 pixels. And there we'll drop another div with a class of footer header. And we'll drop one more div with the class of footer bottom. And we can just apply a vertical flex to a stretch on the X and then space between on the Y. And so that it distributes all these apart. And we can add a gap medium so these things don't run into each other. And then on the header, we can drop an H2 component. We can give it the class of footer title, but it needs a utility of H1. So that way it's just a bit larger looking. And we can copy this and add it in here. And I'm going to go ahead and add a space here. So we could try and add a max width using CH to this to get it to kind of work, but it's never going to wrap perfectly where we want it. So what I'm going to do instead of trying to get that to wrap there is just hit enter here, and that way it just wraps the way I want there. And inside this footer header, we can add a button with link component. It can be the primary style, so just like so. And we can go ahead and add to the footer header a vertical flex aligned to center and center. So it just centers everything up like so. And while we're at it on this base class, let's add a text align center. So that's all good to go. And then let's add a U gap, and let's go with maybe our small. So they're just kind of spaced apart there. And then inside this footer bottom, let's add a div. Let's call this footer social wrap, and inside of this we'll drop a link block, text link, and we can call this footer social link. And I can just call this something like Instagram, and I can duplicate the whole link. And we can say YouTube, and we can duplicate that. And I'll change this one to say LinkedIn. And what we'll do is add a horizontal flex to this, and we'll align to the left and to the center vertically. And we'll add a gap of extra small, like so. And on the whole footer bottom, let's add a text block inside, and we can just copy this little copyright right here, and we can just add that in here. And what we'll want to do is on the whole footer bottom, set a horizontal flex to basically on the X we want a space between, and on the Y we want to center them, like so. And we can add the same gap extra small, just so when these things do have to wrap, there's some nice consistent spacing. When there's not enough space for the copyright, that just wraps over like so. And so now that we have that set, let's go ahead and drop inside the section a global visual component so that it can have a background image or video. And I'll move this to the top. I'm going to take the image off, visibility hidden, and we can go ahead and copy the URL to this video, which I have right here. And I'll just copy that and add it into the video URL field, set video visibility to visible, and we can turn this whole footer wrap into a component. We'll just call this footer. And then we'll also want to grab our hero video, and I can just copy that. And if we go to our hero section, which should be right in here, and we open up the global visual component for this image can be in the background before the video loads, but then we'll turn the video on and set the video URL. So that is set there. And we have a fully responsive, built out sort of website here with a strong system that can carry us forward as we build out other pages throughout our site.